welcome to the horizontal scroller, Smithy Elements. I'm going to crack straight on. This is essentially an empty page. It's got two sections that just give me some space before and after so we can watch what happens as we scroll in and out. For these two sections, just to make it easier to see what we're doing, I'm going to set them to viewport height, so an empty space underneath, and then an empty space. There you go. So in the middle of these two, we will put our horizontal scroller. And again, let's just take this first section that we see and give it a background. And then having added the scroller, it will automatically add 3 slides. This is the default mode for the horizontal scroller. You can see the data type here is empty, so this is just a default. You could set it specifically and deliberately to default, but yeah, basically each of these slides is a section and comes with all of the section settings that you'd normally expect. So you can add padding all around if you want to, and you can add your dividers and your backgrounds, columns and so on. But I'm not going to mess about too much with what you can put in there. That's just basic breakdown stuff. We're going to have a look at how the horizontal scroller works. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the middle scroller slide to a different color in the builder. You can have it so that the horizontal scroll works, but actually when you're trying to work with sections and you constantly have to scroll up and down past the horizontal bit, it gets a bit wearing, and it's not 100% stable. So it's just easier to work with them as normal sections in between. So if I click on my section in the middle, set the background color, so now at least we've got some indication that we're switching between sections. Save that. So all I've done is I've added my horizontal scroller, and now I'm going to see what that looks like on the front end. Here's my full height, not much in particular, and then my first slide, and my second slide, and my third slide. So there you go. We have a slider working out of the box, as it were. So let's have a look at some of the settings. Start with the basic settings. Here we can decide to use either, as I say, the default, which will give you slides, and then here I can add another slide, or I can come over to the bar here and I can duplicate the slides. They work the same way as any other item in breakdance. Alternatively, if I want to use my slides as just a slideshow, so just images, I can actually add just images, and if I take a set of images and choose those, it will ignore any content other than these images, so I don't have to delete these slides if I haven't made up my mind what I want to do with it yet. But now I've saved with my images. If I go to the front end, there we go, we now have a horizontal set of images as if it were a gallery. So looking at one more option for the images is our stack direction. That only works if you're using the stack effect, but let's turn the stack direction on and let's make it up. Why not? And then if we go to our other settings, we'll have a look at these more later, but if we just stick that on stack, so we're using the stack effect, and we save that, and then again we refresh the screen. So now as we scroll, you can see they're stacking. So if I scroll a bit slower, there you go, they're stacking upwards. And then I can go again back here and say, actually, let's stack down just for the sake of it. Press save and refresh the screen. And I have a set of downward stacking slides. So there we go. So those are our main types, if you like, the default, which is the horizontal sections, and the slides, which is a series of images. If I get rid of the images, we get our slides back again. So again, just so that we can see things are different, I'm going to change the background color of that slide. If anybody's noticing that my color box is cut off a bit, that's not a scroll slider thing, that's a head spin thing. I understand they're working on that. It's a small bug that occurs because we've updated to 2.5 breakdowns. So yeah, as I say, they're fixing that. So we have our normal horizontal section. So going back to our options, we then have, what do we want to do about sticking our section? So the first option is the stick position. GSAP works from the top of the screen. So 0% is the top of the screen and 100% is the bottom of the screen. So at the moment we're sticking 0%, and the next is the anchor, which is top. So the anchor is the anchor of our horizontal section. This is the top of our horizontal section. This is the bottom of our horizontal section. So if I wanted to stick so that the bottom of the horizontal section was in the middle of the screen, I could say stick the bottom of the section to 50%, and I would save that. Obviously I'm probably not going to want to do that, but it's just to show you. There you go. So with our horizontal effect now sticking halfway up the screen, it's useful to be able to stick the bottom, for example, to 100%, and then the slider will stick to the bottom of the screen rather than having to work out how tall the slider is and where the top should stick and so on and so forth. So that's the top and bottom anchor are the top and bottom of the horizontal section itself, and then the stick position is relative to the very top of the screen, 0% being the very top. And our next option is snap. We can, if we want to, snap scroll. Again, I can just quickly save it, and I've reset it now to stick in the normal place. If I do a small movement, you can see half of these don't actually have a background color, so that looks a bit odd, but don't worry. There you go, and it's snapping in place. Now, I'll skip buffer just for a second. If we look at scroll speed, going back to our snapping, you can see that actually I don't have to scroll very far and it snaps, and it's all a bit quick. So it's easy for somebody who's browsing the site to miss all of that. What I can do, knowing that I'm using snapping, is I can slow the scroll speed right down. And then if you notice the size of my scroll bar here, if I now refresh the page, you'll notice my scroll bar is diddy. So GSAP kind of, as it were, fools us into having a slow speed by making it scroll many more pixels for every amount of screen. So now I've got to move the mouse a lot more to get the snap, and if I move the mouse continually, it's hard to see obviously because I'm using the scroll wheel, but you can see that even rushing it, it's going, nope, not going to move, not going to move. So the user's much less likely to accidentally scroll past absolutely everything all at once. And you can also sometimes use the scroll speed. Some of the effects look a bit nicer if you force the mouse to slow down a little bit. Keeps the images on the screen for a bit longer with wipe effects and stuff like that. So that's what your scroll speed is good for. I'm going to turn snap and speed off for a moment, and we'll look at the buffer. The buffer, basically one of the things that can happen, I'm going to put 400 into the buffer, which is 400 pixels more or less, because one of the things that can happen is you start scrolling, and let me just, actually I need to refresh the page for my buffer. As you scroll up, it so quickly goes to horizontal that you can't catch it and it looks a bit raggedy. So by adding a buffer in, what we'll find is that we don't scroll. There you go, yeah, let me just save it probably. There. We wait just for a moment as we reach for the horizontal, as we reach the horizontal section. I'm in stack, my apologies. Scroll type, standard, that's better. Right. So when we reach this point and we stick, if I show you more clearly here, just watch this a little bit and you can see that it moves while the horizontal does not. So that gives you just a little bit of wheel movement before the horizontal kicks in, which means the vertical kind of catches up. We get a little half a second and then we start scrolling, so it just feels less abrupt. It's just a bit nicer on the user. So that's what your scroll buffer is. I wouldn't recommend using too large a scroll buffer, or it'll get confusing as they scroll down the screen and nothing happens. But it's very useful just to take out that first jarring shift from vertical to horizontal. Okay, so just to recap quickly, default, we'll have a look at those in a bit. Adding slides, using images as slides, sticking relative to the top of the screen and relative to our actual slider, do we stick the top or the bottom of it? Snapping effects, which work with the stack and the slide, not with the wipe. And then the buffer, which works with the standard scroll and the wipe and most effects, but not the snap, because the snap, the nature of the effect actually works much better if you don't have a buffer on it. And then the scroll speed to control that, and we've got an ease time in there. If we want to control our scroll speed and ease time, then you need an effect that can be eased. So let's stick ourselves over to a wipe effect, and then once we knock out there, anchor the top, and normal speed, ease time 800, shall we say? What I put in there, mine is 800, let's not do that, 800, and save. When we look at our scroll sections moving now, you should see there's a little bit of inertia there. As I'm scrolling, it just takes a moment or two to catch up with itself. Now the wipe effect doesn't look very good with just text, so let's put some images back in there. And then it'll probably be a little clearer what's going on too. So there we are. There's some images, and I'll give myself a little bit of buffer after all. Save. Refresh the screen. And now, as you can see, if I flick the mouse, then it just has a little bit of inertia on it. So it makes it a bit less sudden and snappy. And we get a nice smooth left and right scroll. So again, you can mess about with that. You can put as long or as short an ease time on it. I don't recommend going too far, but if we put something like nearly 2 seconds on there, then you get a really sort of silky. There you go, hopefully you can tell. It's again quite difficult to show that this is happening because you can't see me using the scroll wheel or letting go of it, but hopefully that is pretty obvious that that's a nice smooth scroll. So that's our basic use and how the sticking positions work. We do have 1 or 2 other settings. I'm not going to get into those. I might do an advanced slideshow, slider tutorial, in which case I'll show you the advanced, which enable you to do slightly clever things like have 1 horizontal scroller straight after the other, or 2 next to each other going in opposite directions, and other fancy stuff, but this will stick with the basics for the time being. So given that we're on the type of scroller, I'll show you 1 or 2 more things. First is that you can actually use the scroller from a repeater. So I have attached a repeater to this page, and if I choose the repeater block, which is for the timeline test repeater block, and then I choose my repeater, there you go. So these are repeater elements, and again I've got the wipe effect on. Could have any effect on, probably better with a stand. Well, let's show the reverse, right? The reverse effect for the time being. Reverse is simply going from right to left instead of left to right, but it's also worth noticing that the first post we have here is the bird, and then if we scroll along, the last post we have here is the lizard. So we start with the bird and we end on the lizard. If I go to the front, we've put it in reverse order, so we start with the lizard and then we scroll in the left to right direction and end with the bird because it's all going backwards. So that's using a repeater block, which means you can open this up for clients to change information that's on a horizontal scroller if you want to. And just so it's clear, this is the actual page and this is my repeater block. It's very simple, just some content and image, date and time. And again, if I just change any one of those, then that automatically feeds into the horizontal scroller. So, last but not least, in the content, you can also do a post query. So again, I will need a different block because we need post items. And then the query, I can do anything I like. I can have just the posts and use all of the normal query stuff you would in breakdowns. And then hopefully you can see I've now got some posts up there. So I save that. And also, to be 100% clear, these are my global blocks. So when I'm using the data type query, I'm using a global block. When I'm using repeater, I'm also using a global block. And it's important to keep the relationship between the global blocks that you use and the horizontal scroller. If I have a horizontal scroller at 50 viewport height, but then I make a global block at 100 viewport height, they're going to argue with each other and you'll only see half the content because it'll be off the edge. Yeah, if you create a global block, make sure it has the same dimensions as you want your slides to have and that they're explicitly set. Let's have a quick look at the repeater block. So this is my repeater block. This is the outside div and the container is set, as I'm hoping you can see here, 100 viewport width, 100 viewport height. Nice and simple. So now that fits in to my scroll slider dimensions, which are also 100%, 100% viewport width and height. So if they don't line up, they're not going to work. So let's go back to our slider. Okay, I'm going to put myself back to repeater because I actually did design the repeater element to work relatively well with the slider. And there's my global block. So again, we've got the same deal, stick position, anchor, buffer, etc. all the same as if I were using the slides. And again, you can see the slides are still there. So you can mess about with one or the other and not have to keep deleting or adding them back or whatever. But once you've decided, for example, you might want a repeater block, then you can safely delete all of this. I'm going to leave it there because we might use it again as we're demoing stuff. So the container allows you to set your width and height. 99 times out of 100, you're just going to leave the width alone because it's going to be screen width. It's a horizontal section. If you don't make it full width, it will also cut off. So if I made it half screen width, then it would scroll until this half of the page was blank. So it doesn't really work, but it's in there. You never know. Somebody might find a reason to make use of it, but I would leave that alone most of the time. And then the height we'll have another look at in a moment because we will look at mobile settings, but for the time being we'll leave these alone. And we'll look at our scroll types. So we've seen that we can go basically forward or backwards. We've had a look at the wipe, which gives you that slightly parallax effect. Then there's a vertical wipe and a stack. So the vertical wipe, let's have a look at that while we've got this one in. I'll save that. The vertical wipe is very similar to the horizontal wipe, but as you can see, it works on the vertical. So especially with something like a repeater, when you've got a little bit of content in there, sort of, I don't know, for me it enhances the effect a little bit, but you've also got to be careful because it will cover up text. If I had text all over the whole section, it would be almost impossible for the user to read it. So it's really meant for the image gallery style stuff. And there you go. Okay, so we're going to go back to a nice bog standard default mode with some default slides, and I'm also going to put some background on that last slide, which was a little bit transparent. excuse me for not messing about with the colours much, they probably will be ugly. There you go. Right. So we've got some nice slides, and what was I going to say? Oh yes, the stacking. So again, we'll go here and we'll have a look at the scroll type, and this time we're going to choose the stacking effect, and it's the stacking card effect basically, but it means you can actually go in all sorts of directions. So again, if we come back to our image section, I said I would show you, so I'm just going to show you obviously in front of you. Once you've added some images, you see that I've got my stack direction. I can choose which direction I want it to go in because there's no individual settings, not yet anyway, for the images. So they will all stack either up, down, left or right. But happily, if we're using a default slider, then while we can choose to stack, and it will always stack left, as it says here, it will always stack left, we can change the stack direction on our individual slides. So if I go to my first slide, this is going to be scrolling in vertically. So it's not going to stack, so it doesn't matter what you put in there. But you can ignore that one. Second slide is going to be following it, so that will stack. So we say actually we want that to stack. Let's say we want that to stack up. And then the next slide, we want that to stack right, and the next slide, let's make that stack down, just because we can. So now we've set some stack direction on the slides themselves. Save that. Open that, refresh the screen, and you can see, let's start from the beginning. So we've got vertically in, so stacking doesn't make sense, but because the next one we've asked to stack up, it's crawling in from underneath. Next we said stack right, and you can see we've still got our easing on there, so we get a little bit of easing. So it doesn't quite work with stacking, if you know what I mean, because it just ends a bit too late. So when you've got stacking switched on, probably better turn the easing off, but also you could slow the mouse down just a bit so that it doesn't go by too fast. So again, refresh, and there we go. Excuse me a minute. There we go. So the stacking effect. I think that's about all the effects we've gone through. Let me think about, oh, okay, yes, we do have other bits and bobs. So the next thing we're going to have a look at is fancy effects. They work. They're not as flexible as I'd like them, but just to explain why fancy effects work the way they do, I want to be able to use breakdance effects on all these slides, but unfortunately breakdance measures how high in the viewport our element is. So if I said I wanted this heading to fade in up when it entered the viewport, well, it fades in up when it hits about here in the viewport, when it hits sort of around here. And of course we're starting with a horizontal section, so as our first part of our horizontal section hits here, actually so does every single slide. It all hits the vertical point at the same time, so all the slides trigger at the same time, and then when you reach the slide, the animation's already played and it just doesn't work. So what we have to do is we have to say, well, actually we're moving horizontally, so I need you to trigger this animation relative to the side of the screen rather than the top and bottom of the screen. So that's what our fancy slides will do. If we go back to our scroll slider, turn on our fancy slides, and then let's, for sake of something, I'll choose the first one. We're going to choose some drop slides. And how long is that going to take? Well, say 0.6 of a second, and we're going to have a large amount so we can see it really happening, and we're going to have a large stagger. Stagger means that this will happen first, this will happen second, the next element third, the next element fourth, and so on. We'll each have a slightly longer gap. You'll see it happening anyway in a moment. And then do we want to fade in? So if not, then they will be fully visible all the time, or we can have them fade in as they animate in. So you've basically got a slide in by keeping it switched off, or you've got to fade in by switching it on. And this is the easing. There's a little widget down here that explains the easing, and you can look it up, but it's basically GSAP's standard easing, power 2 or bouncing in or elastic. So I recommend a journey around the GSAP site if you want to learn more about how easing works. Easing out, and then the position start. So again, we worry about sticking from the top. So 0% is top, 100% is bottom. And if we're thinking about whether we're triggering horizontally, then we're going to look at our horizontal position actually from the left. But this is mostly unintuitive, so I hope people will forgive me. I've made it a bit easier. Imagine how much of your element has entered the screen. So what I've done is I've made it so that you can type in, say, 20, and that is 20% of my element has hit in the screen. So that's when I want you to trigger. So let's just have a quick look at what's happening now then. So we've enabled some fancy slides with a drop effect, and we want 20% of our item to be in the viewport before it's triggered. So let's go and have a look at what that looks like. Now the first slide won't do anything. You can use any breakdance animation on the first slide because that enters vertically, so it triggers like it's supposed to. So there's no point in me adding more effects. You can add those yourself. But then for the next slide to come in, of course I'm on stack, sorry. And this is for standard mode really, otherwise it's difficult to measure exactly what's going on because stack comes in all sorts of different directions. So there you go. Well, there you are. You can see the effect kicking in there, but let's refresh the screen again. So first slide we can use breakdance, so not a problem. Second slide, you can see it dropping in. Third slide, dropping in and staggering. Next slide, dropping in and staggering. So I will own fully, this is not brilliant, and it's the best that I can make it do working horizontally. It basically will take every first child, as it were, so every sibling on this level, and it will stagger the animation if you ask it to stagger. If you turn that off, it won't stagger at all. So if I wanted, for example, for the second slide here that's got a heading and 3 blocks of text, if I wanted the heading and all of these 3 bits of text to come in at once, I would have to wrap them in a div. I could then wrap another heading and some text in a div, and that would be the next thing to animate in if it's on the same level. So with the fancy slides, you can add a little bit of animation to your element and you can control roughly when it's going to be triggered. As I said, it works for the normal horizontal scrolling. You can see it for everything because my aim is to get it working with everything, but for the time being, fancy effects work best with the standard effect, and they can be used with the horizontal wipe, but again, the horizontal wipe isn't really for items with content because the content is too easily hidden. That's much more aimed at image gallery effect. So fancy slides, standard slider, right or left, and it enables you to control a little bit of animation as your items enter in. Personally, I don't recommend a huge amount of animation. The fact that it's moving horizontal is usually fancy enough, but it's up to you now. Okay, and then last but not least, there is an overlay option. So you can use this with your regular sections or you can use it with images. And the overlay gives you a chance to add, an overlay that will, put one on. That will open up the CSS mix mode effects. So if I put on difference, it's usually fairly obvious, and then I put a white mask, you can see the colours changing there. So a white mask on black and white makes white black and black white. So if I get rid of that color, you can see that it's basically inverting the colors. Okay, which isn't very exciting of itself, but if I make it a linear gradient and maybe 130 degrees, I can then have a bit of fun. So I can make a white gradient that goes to a white gradient, sorry, to a white color, and then I can add one more color that is again white but is fully transparent, and then I can have a little shaded area if I want to. If I save that and refresh my page, you can see I now have color change along this line. I mean, it's not very pretty. I really just chosen all these colors and everything at random, but hopefully you can see it's got potential to create some quite interesting and nice effects. Not forgetting that you can leave all of these background colors as they are, so effectively set them all to white so that the difference makes no real difference, and then you would just see the text doing this lovely color change while it was sliding past. And again, if you're feeling fancy and accurate, you can just about, I find this a bit fiddly with the breakdance gradient picker, but there you go. You can just about create yourself, and if I move the first slide up here, I think it will probably, and refresh the page, there you go. So now we've got a line in between where we get what can be quite a nice effect of color changing as we're scrolling past. So I don't know, I put it in there because I liked it and I played about with it. It made me chuckle every now and then, so I left it there. But yeah, you can use all of the mix modes. Some of them work really nicely, and again, if you're using something like stacking effects with semi-transparent colors, you can actually create some quite interesting and nice effects with it. But I'm just showing you the basics there. Feel free to play with it, see what you can do with it. Let me know if you find something you think is really nice. So last but not least in the whole scroll slider is mobile. So I'm going to show you, because it was designed, one of the folks who's bought this plugin specifically requested this feature, and specifically because of the image slider. Now obviously you can use this with the other modes as well, and I can show you them in a minute, but this was why. If you have an image slider and we put it into, let's enjoy a wipe effect, shall we? And give ourselves a little bit of, let's say 800 ease time. Okay, so if I save this, and then on the front end, I've got a lovely slide. Oh yeah, and it could be, these are showroom photos, or I'm an estate agent and these are images of the house, whatever, you just want it to look a bit fancy, all well and good. But, and I'm going to do this a slightly odd way because otherwise it's going to look weird as I try and photograph film me, what's it? Now I'm looking at it on a mobile device, and I mean, it's all very well, but it's all a bit out of shape. It would be far better if we still had our 16:9 aspect ratio. So enter mobile responsiveness. Down here we've got our mobile option, and we choose to resize on, let's say, phone landscape for one of something else, and then we decide where's it going to stick. So just going back to 0% at the top, 100% at the bottom, where are we going to stick? Well, I'm going to make my slider 50% of the viewport height at phone landscape. So at phone landscape, my height is going to be 50 viewport height. So you can see there, in order to make that look like it's in the middle, I'm going to stick it 25%. 25% is about here. So we got 25% plus 25% is 50 plus 50. There you go. So if you had it at 60% height, you'd stick it at 20% and it would look like it was in the middle. So resize on phone landscape, sticky position 25%, and resize height there. Let's save that. And then when we review it on the phone, it looks like that. And again, if we come out, I mean, I could be dragging my browser size here, but because I'm recording it, that might send things a bit doolally. So you basically get full size on desktop, but if somebody does open it up on a mobile, they're now much more sensibly proportioned. And of course you can put content here. That it is worth noting, and I'll explain a little bit here, this is going to get technical and boring, so anybody who says, well, I just wanted to know about the effects and stuff, you can leave the room now. And anybody who's interested in how all of this actually works and why it works the way it does, I'm going to explain a little bit of that now. So very quick note, I was going to go into a whole load of technical nonsense there, but I stopped myself. So this is just to say I'll make a separate video of how things work, the way they work and why, because it's quite long-winded. So yeah, thanks for watching this. Hope it helps. Got any problems whatsoever, send me an email or come to the Facebook page. And happy building.